So, what's going on guys, Kids here and welcome back to a brand new video. For today I will rank every single build in Diablo 4 Season 5 to see which ones are the best and most overpowered. Overall I've gathered the top 550 builds, so 10 builds per each class. And after countless of hours of testing, here are the results. This tier list defines the performance of the builds against high level endgame activities such as pushing pits, killing tormented bosses, fighting in nightmare dungeons, and infernal hordes. So, if this sounds interesting to you, then let's get right into it. So then moving over to the first S tier builds, and they are Andariel Rogue, Barrage Rogue, Penetrating Shot Rogue, Lightning Spear Sorcerer, Fireball Sorcerer, Bash Barbarian, Rapid Fire Rogue, Bone Spirit Necromancer, Flay Barbarian, Firebolt Sorcerer, Chain Lightning Sorcerer, and the Landslide Druid. So the Andariel Rogue is a build centered around the mythic unique called the Andariel's Visage that creates devastating poison explosions. The build focuses around buffing the proc damage from that item using abilities, passives, and multiplicative aspects, while building around the close quarter combat key passive. The main skill Barrage, combined with the updated Fist of the Fate, do an excellent job with fast attacks and high lucky hit chance. The Andariel's Rogue is very straightforward to play, given that you mostly need to spam the Barrage with poison imbuement. Also, given the high poison damage that you will be dealing with this build, you don't have to stick around and wait for things to die. The poison will finish off the mobs a few seconds later. So this is amazing for speed farming. Then the next build is called the Barrage Rogue. He is a jack of all trades, but master of none, as you can pick which distance is the right for your situation, making this a true hybrid build. You can cast the Barrage skill at mid-range to spread your arrows out for massive AoV, or dash towards the elite to shotgun all the arrows into a single target for insane damage. Then we have the Penetrating Shot Rogue. This is a powerful build which scales really well into the endgame. There are many different tools and strategies that you can use to assist keeping you safe as you unleash hell from many angles. Penetrating Shot is a core skill that fires one massive piercing arrow. While this doesn't sound exciting at first, but when you spice it up with the Ambrax's dagger and the trick shot aspect, then you can do crazy amount of damage. As with most rogue skills, maximizing its potential requires good positioning, because you do increase damage the more enemies you hit in a line. Then we have the Lightning Spear Sorcerer, which is a new build that became possible thanks to the reworked aspect of the splintering energy. This aspect upgrades the lightning spear's measly 16% damage to up to 110%, that is further increased by your critical strike damage. In the late game, this equates to approximately with a 60,000% boost. So with an aspect like this, it should come as no surprise that previously useless spell now is a real powerhouse. Then we have the Fireball Sorcerer. This build uses the Great Balls of Fire to explode absolutely everything. The AoV damage of this build is excellent, but it struggles against tanky isolated mobs, in particular bosses in high tier nightmare dungeons. However, this sorcerer build excels in all other types of content, while making a great show out of it. As you can tell, Fireball is our main damage skill, so we can max it out and spam it 24/7 for billions upon billions of damage. Then next up we have the Bash Barbarian. This build came back into the meta after previously getting a major buff with the additional temper day fixes. In the case of Bash, this means that it gets an extra cleave animation for AoV increase, as well as damage multipliers on top of it. It also benefits greatly from the aspects like the adaptability and Moonrise. But the bad news is that both of these are not immediately available from the Codex of Power. But once you get them, then this build becomes a true powerhouse that is capable of killing everything that the game has to offer. Then the Rapid Fire Rogue build is a great all-rounder, suitable for any situation, with variations available for high-end content. Where this build comes into play is the skill called the Rapid Fires, which has massive single target damage, and that is where he really shines. Rapid Fire is an attack skill that unleashes a hail of arrows in a straight line. This naturally provides high damage output against bosses, but makes dealing with packs of mobs a bit more difficult. Then for one of the last S tier builds we have the Bone Spear Necromancer. This setup has the strongest burst damage potential in a single attack, I'm talking about billions of damage. Bone Spirit has the largest skill damage multiplier in the whole game, and when you prioritize reaching 100% critical strike chance, then the damage from a single Bone Spirit can one-shot even a pre-tormented boss. So it's clear to say that this is the strongest meta necromancer build in Diablo 4. Then Flay Barbarian is a build that relies on Flay to apply massive amounts of bleed on the target, which makes it one of the best choices to conquer a high level content. With addition of the tempered affixes, Flay duration can be extended to last over 20 seconds, and we can even use the Rapture skill to deal all of our accumulative damage in one deadly blow. Flay is a single target ability, which makes this build most suited for bossing and higher tier pits. Then the Firebolt Sorcerer uses a Flame Weaver to turn the Firebolt into a real damage skill. Unfortunately, the way this item works makes the build quite clunky, because first you have to place down the firewall, then shoot enemies with a firebolt, and then you have to wait for them to die, because you will deal damage over time. On top of that, the damage only gets really high if you hit the same enemy with all 3 firebolts right after they split, so this means that this build is very single target oriented, even if the firebolts can technically hit multiple enemies at a time. Then the Chain Lightning Sorcerer has just returned back into the new meta as one of the most visually impressive builds in the game. The Sorcerer paralyzes and destroys monsters with a barrage of electricity. It has insane mobility and great speed farming potential by shredding open world events and hell tides with ease. His Nightmare dungeon pushing capability is also very good, so Chain Lightning and Unstable Currents together make up the bulk of this build's damage. And for the last S tier build, we have the Landslide Druid. This build revolves around the Nature's Future key passive, and the newly buffed Earthbreaker and the Unsung Aesthetics wrap to generate an incredible amount of lightning storms, which benefit from both the storm and the earth multipliers. The Landslide Druid is an efficient endgame leveler and a solid speed farmer. With enough good gear, it can become one of the best, most effective boss killers and pit pusher builds in the game. Now let's move over to the A tier, and the builds that deserve to be in here is the Minion and Bloodlands Necromancer, then the Frozen Orb and Blizzard Sorcerers, then the Bone Spear Necromancer, then Boulder, Shear and the Companion Druids, then Dead Blow, Rend and Double Swing Barbarian, and finally the Twisting Blades Rogue. So the Minion Necromancer is a build that pretty much plays itself. This Necromancer build is a pure summoner, which relies almost exclusively on the damage of its minions. Your Army of the Dead skill will grant you the ability to instantly raise all of your undead friends and provide an incredible damage boost during its duration. Then the Bloodlands Necromancer build unleashes a devastating single target damage that tries to melt bosses while utilizing the Blood Orbs and the Lanced mechanic to generate AoE attacks, which can clear your entire screen from mobs. The Bloodlands Necromancer deals its peak damage by making use of the guaranteed overpower abilities provided by the blood skills, which also offer a built-in tankiness through the Fortify. Its cheap essence cost means that you can spam cast a single target and output great DPS numbers, while with the Lance mechanic, it will help you to easily spread your damage across the battlefield. Then we have the Frozen Orb Sorcerer, which unleashes an endless barrage of frozen orbs to decimate her foes from afar. You have a lot of mobility tools, all while your character melts open world events and hell tides with ease. The Frozen Orbs makes all enemies vulnerable for never-ending pain train. Also, Frozen Orb comfortably shatters dense monster packs, and its single target damage is also not bad, although provided that you can stay at the right distance. Then the Blizzard Sorcerer is a build that uses the signature cold spell Blizzard, enhanced by the glacial aspect, to rip enemies apart with countless of ice spikes. This build has great single target and AoE damage, and it can bring you far into the pit. The only weaknesses that this build has is that it requires ramping on single targets, and some mobs could move out of your damage stacks. Then next up we have the OG build, the Bone Spear Necromancer, that pierces all the enemies it hits. Then it breaks apart when it collides with an object, and then it reflects back 3 to 5 shards of bones. This incredibly strong skill alone will allow you to snipe enemies, chase and defeat treasure goblins, and do amazing AoE damage to demolish anything that comes in your way. Then we have the Boulder Druid. This build currently demands high level gearing and a very active playstyle. But once you get required gear from the Bolt Heart Hunker, it becomes very easy to use. This build focuses on using the Dolmen Stone to empower our Boulder skill in the endgame that will do insane amount of DPS. But keep in mind that without the Dolmen Stone and enough of the nature cooldown reductions, with an Endless Tempest, then this build will not work properly, so we can only use it when you have the basic items farmed. Then next we have the Wind Shear Druid, but this build lacks an AoE, it more than makes up for it in damage, and it is a very good pit pusher and bosser for druids in the current season. The build revolves around the reworked aspect of the Calm Breeze, which inflicts poison damage over time to all the mobs it passes through. Also, this damage over time inherits the Storm and basic skills from the initial cast of the Wind Shear, which allows for some incredible scalers in the form of the Moonrise, Adaptility and the Thunderstruck. Then we have the Companion Druid. As the name implies, this build will show you the power of the companions. Most of its damage comes from the wolves in the endgame and even gets its own unique item, which is called the Storm's Companion. So in this setup, we get the entire squad to join us, thanks to the updated aspect of the Shepherds, and to add extra friends with the new addition of the Moon Rage. On top of this, there's a new aspect called the Spirit Bond, that makes that our companion friend can't die. Then we have the Dead Blow Barbarian. This build got a major overhaul in the season with the addition of the third blade, which essentially makes it a spammable core ability by removing its natural cooldown. On top of its exceptional high base damage, it gets an extremely strong aspect multiplier via the Encroaching Wrath, as well as its own unique called the Overkill, which significantly boosts its damage and gives us a small AoE shockwave. Unfortunately, most of the power provided to this build is not unlocked until much later in the game, which makes it a strictly endgame setup. However, once it all comes together though, it is certainly a very powerful barbarian build. Then for one of the last A tier builds we have the Rend Barbarian. The Rend is a core skill that quickly applies a large bleed to all enemies, directly in front of the Barbarian. It is one of the most fury efficient core skills, and boasts the highest base damage per cast time. Its only drawbacks are its small AoE and the fact that its damage is dealt over time rather than immediately. So in order to solve these problems, we will use the Rupture to instantly damage enemies for the total bleeding amount, which gives us an insane DPS numbers. Then we have the Double Swing Barbarian. This is a hard-hitting, fast-paced melee build that excels at all content that the game has to offer. Its small hit zone may seem underwhelming at first, but once the attack speed buff starts stacking and the twisters start spinning, then the double swing quickly becomes a deadly force that can destroy anyone that stands in our way. This hit and run style of play, while also making short work of any boss, is very fun and entertaining. And then for the last and final A tier build we have the Twisting Blades Rogue. This is a great speed farming build that can clear content faster than most others in the game, but also it comes with a high skill ceiling. If you're looking for a fun and agile rogue build that flies around the battlefield, then this might be for you. So then let's move over to the next category, which is the B tier. And this is the place where most forgotten / nerf builds for the season will reside. So we have the HOTA Barbarian, Thorns Barbarian, Ball Lightning, Arc Clash, Meteor, Ice Shards and the Fireball Sorcerers. Then the Hurricane Druid, Leap Quake Barb, Werewolf Tornado Druid, Upwheel and Whirlwind Barbarian, Grenade, Heartseeker, Flurry and the Arrow Storms Rogue, then the Pulverizing and Lightning Storms Druids, and finally the Blood Surge Necromancer. So for the first one we have the Hammer of the Ancients Barbarian. This is a fan favorite build, that while it naturally has a very small AoE, we solve this by using the Tempered Hammer of the Ancients and the aspect of the Ancestral Force. This setup drastically increases the radius of the impact, allowing us to obliterate almost full screens of enemies. Then we have the Ball Lightning Sorcerer. This build uses Gravitational Aspect to make many shiny balls of lightning go round and round. This build has good single target damage and decent AoE coverage, and it can even evaporate every enemy in the game. However, the main downside of this build are its melee range and the lack of burst damage. Then next up we have the Ice Shard Sorcerer. This build transforms your sorcerer into an ice-based machine gun, shooting out ice shards at around 1000 rounds per minute. With its great single target DPS and relatively long range, This build can perform pretty well in the nightmare dungeons. Then next up we have the Hurricane Druid. This build projects as one of the druid's more effective pit pushers and busters, but it is very reliant on the endgame temper. However, once your setup is acquired, so your Hurricane is guaranteed to both critically strike and overpower, then this effect can last as long as 34 seconds with a single cast, which makes our damage to go from 17 per tick to well over 17 million DPS. Then for one of the last ones we have the Whirlwind Barbarian. Whether it's speed farming, pushing nightmare dungeons or anything in between, the Whirlwind does it all. It is extremely versatile in both what it can accomplish and also in its choice of gearing. So if you feel like bludgeoning your foes to death with a Whirlwind, then pick up that two-handed mace and spin to win. Then we have the Pulverize Druid. The combination of the Pulverize and the Shockwave aspect deals damage in large, cone-shaped area in front of you. To improve the single target damage, we want to find the sweet spot between its radius and the created shockwave to hit enemies twice as hard with each cast. This build takes the advantage of as many as 3 guaranteed overpower sources and multiplies their damage with the Ursine Strength Key passive. Then now let's move over to the C tier, and the builds that we will place in here are the Blight, Minion Blood Surge and the Sever Necromancer. So the Blight Necromancer build melds the overwhelming power of the darkness damage over time, while taking advantage of the crippling crowd control. This build is great for early progression, since it doesn't require any unique items, and many of its best legendary aspects are found in the Codex of Power. And lastly we have the Sever Necromancer. This is the coolest looking necro build in Diablo 4, because we will use the Sever skill, which sends a scythe-wielding reaper screaming across the battlefield to eviscerate your enemies up to 4 times. Coupled with the amazing damage output and consistent crowd control, this shadow-wielding powerhouse absolutely annihilates anyone that crosses your path. And finally, for the last and final category, we have the D tier, and the builds that deserve to be in here are the Shadow Surfer, Infinimist Necromancer, and the Shadow Step Rogue. So the Infinimist Necromancer build combines the highest survivability rates with massive AoE shadow damage. The build excels at outlasting the most dangerous content. This setup seems like any run-of-the-mill darkness build. However, when you spam the corpse explosion and rely on lucky hit procs for crowd control, then you get an infinite uptime on the Blood Mist skill, and this is where your DPS truly comes from. And then last but not the least, we have the Shadow Step Rogue. This build features a new rogue archetype and unique playstyle. The purpose of this build is to zoom through all the content in the game, therefore we use the Shadow Step as our main damage ability. This build also relies on stacking cooldown reduction to instantly jump from enemy to enemy, which are also boosted by conditional multipliers on each hit, and that's about it.